The Chicago wind lashed cold against both cheeks, but my heart burned hot as I stood under the dome of Credit Union One Arena, where graduation caps had just flown up like a flock of birds bursting from a nest. I squeezed my mother's hand, looking at Deb standing off to the wing with black glasses and a triumphant smile that for 4 years I had learned to swallow down. They cut my college fund from the year I was 17 with dry letters and a shake of the head. The family does not qualify. But this morning, right on this stage, Grandpa Frank will speak for me. Dean Lynn stepped out, holding an envelope embossed with O'Rourke Scholar Letter. From behind the curtain, a man adjusted his tie, Banker Alvarez, like a clock just set to the correct time. The speakers echoed and the crowd's roar rose like waves. I breathed in deeply. This was not just a ceremony. This was the day an old promise was unsealed. Because in the will, my grandfather set a provision few would expect, a matching clause. When I graduate on time, the bank will automatically disperse an amount equal to the total that was withdrawn, plus interest, transferred directly to me in front of the school's witnesses. Deb doesn't know. And I also don't need to say anything more than stepping up, receiving the diploma, then opening the envelope. I am Noelle. Welcome to our channel, where we don't shout, we only open the right letter at the right time. Thank you for spending your time here. Each of your views and comments is warmth in today's cold wind. If you believe the truth can return to the hands of the one who deserves it, please like, subscribe, and comment windy, so I know you stood with me in these stands, amid the cheers and a flip, waiting to light up. But for this letter to be present today, 4 years earlier, someone had to quietly steer the paperwork. Chicago wakes me with the faint smell of burnt coffee and the river wind whipping through the crack of the door. In the small kitchen in Bridgeport, my mother, Elaine, stands by the kettle, her night shift coat hanging on the back of the chair, her eyes still streaked with fatigue, but her hand steady as she measures spoonfuls of coffee. I sit right at the table, surrounded by sticky notes plastered everywhere. FAFSA due, shift iarn coffee truck, quiz econ thu, call bursar. The old laptop with a UIC sticker lets out a small fan sigh, the red battery light like a reminder that I need to plug it in immediately. Next to it are a pair of Converse with worn soles, crusted with last month's salt snow, and a tube can holding loose change, each coin an hour of standing selling lattes in the cold wind. I study until I hear the CTA orange line screech across the tracks, the scrape of iron wheels on each other rasping like a rough encouragement. I stuff my notebooks into my backpack, wrap a scarf, leave the house. On the train, commuters huddle in puffer jackets, everyone smelling of to-go coffee and rain-soaked coats. Chicago feeds me with night shifts and bitter coffee, with mornings curled up reading on the train car and afternoons squeezing into the UIC library to find a free seat. Grandpa Frank CFD, a lifetime riding the fire engine, had faced fire more than anyone I know, yet his voice when he talked about school was startlingly gentle. Study. Your 529 fund will definitely be enough. I believed that sentence all through high school until the day he died. The one who held the keys when he left was Aunt Deb. Since then, the letters saying not eligible and the calls saying disbursement postponed have appeared as regularly as the train schedule. Between 2 classes, I run back to Pilsen, slip into an old print shop to work part-time accounts payable. The smell of ink blended with new paper makes me remember the small exhibits at school. I match each invoice to the purchase order, stamp a paid seal, bundle them, and send them to the shop owner. The job isn't hard, it just requires care, and I treat it as a quiet exercise teaching me to count every dollar so it doesn't slip away wasted. The shop owner says, Noelle, you've got good eyes. Don't let anyone forget the numbers. I nod, thinking of the numbers someone has forgotten in the account meant for me. In the afternoon, I head back to stand at the coffee truck in front of UIC's gate. The river wind from downtown gusts through, snapping lightly at my neck, making the coffee steam rise higher. I set a cup on the counter, smile. Double espresso for you, then yank my beanie down. The faces of students before graduation glow with a very Chicago kind of hope. Humble, hardworking, few words. I think about my mother, about her hands soaking in hot water every night to ease the ache after her shift. About my grandfather, about the old firefighter's helmet hanging in the living room. About Deb, and the envelopes Grandpa handed directly to the one he trusted, only for someone later to stash them away in a drawer out of reach. At night, my mother and I eat a simple soup. Mom slides me an envelope for a partial scholarship that just came in. A partial scholarship is a big win already. Try a little harder for the last term. I smile, tired but warm. I will. I owe Chicago one graduation. Mom doesn't ask much, she just lays a hand on my back for a beat. In that silence, I hear the city still running, a bus braking hard, the train bell dinging once at the crossing, wind skimming the window frame. At night, I go back to the library, sit by the glass looking down at the street, keep typing my paper, the other hand flipping the exam schedule. Every time I get tired, I open my phone to look at the photo of Grandpa in his firefighting gear, a weathered but warm smile. I remind myself quietly, I don't study to beat anyone. I study to keep a promise to myself and to him. As for the money, the fund, those lines that say, not eligible, let it be for tomorrow morning, amid a crowd of flying caps and stage lights. When a man named Alvarez will step out with an envelope that has waited for me for 4 years. The wind may be cold, but this heart is hot enough to stand firm to the last minute. And Chicago, the fierce yet gentle city, will certify me with both a diploma and an opened seal letter. And then the first signs appeared, not with a shout, but with mailing addresses rerouted. I remember clearly the afternoon when I was 17, the wind from Lake Michigan blasting through the glass-fronted row of Lakeshore First Bank, blowing away a few blue flyers. Deb held my elbow like leading a child to get a shot, saying, "Go see the advisor so you can feel at ease about school." Inside, the smell of new carpet and weak coffee. The clerk smiled, spread a stack of papers in front of us. I saw my name on the first line, and in the Guardian box was Deb's rounded handwriting. I asked, "Do we need my mom to sign?" Deb smiled lightly. "Your mom's on shift, let me handle it. It's just scheduling a look at the investment portfolio." I nodded it off, still believing the line, "Your 529 fund is enough," that Grandpa kept saying. As we walked out, Deb added, "Money sleeping in the bank needs to be woken up so it can multiply." That sentence sounded smooth like an ad, but the cold wind made me shiver. A few weeks later, a strange envelope arrived in the home mailbox. Notice of change of guardian for the education account. My mother, Elaine, tore the envelope open right at the kitchen table, frowning. I called Deb, asked, "What is this?" Deb spoke quickly as if reciting, "Just rebalancing the portfolio, a new management fee. The bank recommends it." "Don't worry, I'm protecting your future." I asked, "Why was the mailing address changed to a P.O. box?" Deb laughed. "So the paperwork doesn't get lost. Chicago loses mail like it's nothing." Hanging up, the kitchen fell into a damp kind of silence, with only the CTA orange line droning outside the window frame. That holiday season, the family gathered at Lou Malnati's. Thick pizza steam, cheese stretching. Everyone turned to tease me about choosing a school. Deb flaunted a new sparkling ring, talked about smart investing, and then steered into travel stories. I looked at my mother. She lowered her head to pour soda, asked nothing more. I mustered the courage. Aunt Deb, my college fund. Can we look at the balance? Deb blinked. Come on, eat first. The account goes up and down with the market. You'll get a different number whenever you ask. I bit into the pizza. The tomato sauce suddenly much more sour. On the wall, an old map of Chicago hung askew, as if the city itself tilted with that half answer. The red flags didn't appear as flashing lights. They came like a lingering drizzle. Deb's phone was often in a meeting right when the bank called to confirm. My home mailbox suddenly lacked envelopes bearing the fund's logo, replaced instead by emails saying, "Account update," sent to an address I had never used. I logged into the portal and got an error. Access rights have changed. Contact administrator. When I asked, Deb texted, "I rerouted things for convenience. You focus on studying." The words "focus on studying" were like a drape. The more it covered, the more you realize the emptiness beneath. During the first winter of freshman year, the wind from the lake whistled across the bridge. I stood in front of the bursar's office with the tuition bill in my hand. The line 529 disbursement crossed out, replaced with payment due. I called Deb. The line was busy, then cut off. I called the bank. They said, "The Guardian record has changed. Contact the authorized party." I went back to the library, opened the old laptop with the peeling UIC sticker, and typed out an application for a second part-time job. Outside, snow speckled the shoulders of passers-by. I folded my worry into a single note. Ask again tomorrow morning. In the spring of sophomore year, a late-night email fell into spam. Management fee adjustment. I clicked it open, skimmed, and saw my name inserted after a long dash, as if my name had been pushed back in my own future. I forwarded it to my mother. Early in the morning, she left a sticky note by the kettle. "Contact the bank. Go with me." We went to the branch. The teller looked it up and said softly, "The mailing address on file has been changed for years now." My mother turned to Deb at the family meal afterward. Deb only gave a slight shrug. Grown-ups handle big things. So I learned to count the traces in the wind. A blocked call, a rerouted letter, a midnight email moving funds, the strange smell of money evaporating. Unlike the bitter coffee or the printer's ink where I worked, that smell doesn't touch the nose. It only touches the numbers. I recorded dates and times in a notebook, like noting a pour-over recipe. How much water? How many grounds? Because I understood that one day, under stage lights and after the crowd's cheer, the man named Alvarez would open an envelope and read aloud a clause few would expect, and all the traces I'd gathered over 4 years would turn into a headwind, returning to me what the lake wind had carried off. If you want less emotion in an argument, you ask for paper. And we started asking, on paper. Jada was the first to put a hand on my shoulder and say, "We'll ask in writing." That evening, the two of us sat under the warm yellow light of the Bridgeport apartment, opened the old laptop and wrote a public records request. If any part of the scholarship went through the school or the state, it had to have a trail. Jada typed fast. I read slowly, fixing each word like mending a tear. Done with the FOIA, we moved on to the bank. Under the rules, a parent and the beneficiary have the right to request statements, ask for the log of address changes, contact emails, and who clicked the transfer button. I printed a power of attorney form for my mother to sign. The next morning, the two of us brought everything to the branch. The teller looked at the paperwork for a long moment, then invited us into a small room and set on the table a stack of statements thick as a winter. On the very first page, my eyes met steady, gradual withdrawals over 24 months. Like a little clock. Not loud, just dripping away. In the memo column, one line repeated, tuition advance. I felt my heart tighten when I saw the recipient column. Deb O'Rourke Hayes. Not the bursar, not the school, not a tuition payment agent. My aunt. My hand trembled slightly, but I kept going. There was a contact update form. The admin email had been changed to a Gmail address in Deb's name. The paper notices were rerouted to a P.O. box. I looked over at my mother. She said nothing. Only set her finger on her old signature line and gave the slightest shake of her head. The clerk brought over another packet. Signature verification. I bent close. The Elaine O'Rourke on the update form, the pen strokes oddly heavy, the R stretched long as if the writer had tried to imitate but forgot my mother's hand rhythm. I pulled out my wallet, took an old check my mother had signed, set them side by side. Different. Clearly different. I snapped a photo with my phone, labeled it with date and time, careful as photographing an assignment in the library. Money doesn't disappear, I heard myself say, low. It follows the orbit of greed, straight into a relative's account. The teller looked at me with a gaze both sympathetic and uneasy, then handed over an additional log of who last logged in. An IP address that matched the office where Deb works. Everything lined up like the wind on the lakeshore, blowing the same direction. Jada pulled her chair closer. We need someone who speaks numbers better. She connected me with Harper Quinn, a young CPA, also the first in her family to go to college, who heard the story and had her Zoom camera on within an hour. Harper spoke in a warm voice, with the cadence of someone who has helped many like me. I'll take the forensics pro bono, not for drama, but for clarity. She guided us. Download original statements in PDF, request the change log from the bank's system, save the address change emails. If possible, get ATM receipts or internal transfer slips with memos. I sent everything through a shared folder, named each file by date, not missing a character. Harper scanned quickly, pointed to the tuition advance column. If it were truly tuition, you'd see the school or a payment servicer. Here, it's an individual. Add the off-kilter signature sample. We have enough to ask loudly. Toward evening, I stood at the bus stop watching clouds pull across the roof of UIC. In my bag, the statements rustled every time I moved, reminding me that the truth is not a shout, but a stack of papers in order. I texted my mother one line. We have a path. She replied with a heart emoji and, I'll make soup tonight. I smiled, suddenly finding Chicago gentler. The wind was still cold, but no longer cutting into my chest. That night, Jada set 2 mugs of hot cocoa on the table. I opened Zoom, and Harper split the screen. On the left were the steady drawdowns. On the right, a spreadsheet compounding interest. When you graduate on time, Harper said, we'll set this number next to the match clause your grandpa left, and in front of them, the money will go the right way. I watched the last line of numbers light up, felt my heart settle, like watching mortarboards about to fly, not to show off, but to fall into the right hands that have waited long enough. The paperwork is lined up. The clock does not wait. Friday. The account freezes. The UIC bursar's office was lit in cold neon, like a freezer. I stood in line among heavy coats, palm sweat soaking the edge of my file. When it was my turn, the clerk looked at the screen and looked up. Your account is frozen because the final installment hasn't been paid. I swallowed. I have a commitment from my grandfather's 529 fund. Aunt Deb said it would be paid this week. She pointed to the red line. We only see withdrawals, not payments. The deadline is Friday. If it's late, the system will cancel your course registration and block graduation. The word cancel fell onto the desk like a stamp. I gripped my backpack strap. What if I pay in installments? We only unlock when we receive payment in full or have real disbursement documentation. The screen reflected my ashen face, behind it the line growing longer. I stepped back, hearing the printer run, the steady beep of card swipes like a countdown clock. In the hallway, draft slipped through the glass seams, hitting me with a chill unlike the lake wind, more like the silence of family. I called Deb. It rang 3 times, then in a meeting. I texted, "The deadline is Friday." On the other side, a green dot appeared and then went dark. I sat on the steps, watching students hug graduation gowns to try on sizes. One burst out laughing because the cap was too big. I opened email and saw the slot for my final class, the capstone, counting down a 48-hour hold. My heart skipped a beat. I thought of the crudest option: withdraw from school, work full-time at the print shop in Pilsen, do evening shifts at the coffee truck, save up and come back later. Another voice in my head growled softly, "You're not 17 anymore. You've made it this far." But my eyes had already opened the withdrawal form page, the cursor blinking like fingers tapping on a table. I called my mother. She picked up amid hospital noise. "I can't get my lunch break, but listen to me. Don't sign anything yet. We'll figure it out tonight." Her voice trembled a little. I didn't want her to hear me cry, so I tilted my face to the white ceiling and swallowed the tears back. Jada texted, "Meet at the library. Bring the statements." I came, hands icy. Jada set 2 cups of cocoa on the table. "Chicago teaches us to ask in writing. But if you crash today, what will you use to flip it tomorrow?" I gave a crooked smile. Harper zoomed in, a desk lamp casting a warm halo behind her. "A 48-hour course hold? Give me 24. I'll call the bank to request a dispute pending confirmation to temporarily unlock. No promises, but don't pull the plug yourself." Her voice was like a thin blanket. In the afternoon, I went to the coffee truck, my hands pouring espresso while my head felt lost. Each time a customer said extra sugar, I nodded, sure, half a beat late. A regular student wished, "Almost there, yeah?" I smiled. "Yeah, I hope so." On the orange line back to Bridgeport, I held the bursar bill folded into quarters, the crease sharp like the road I'd chosen. Lake Michigan outside glittered under gray light, cold and beautiful. The kind of beauty that makes you want to stand a little longer even as the wind slips down your neck. At night, I set the rented grad cap on the table and then put it back in the bag. My mother brought out a pot of soup, said little. We ate slowly. After dinner, I opened the laptop, stared at the withdrawal form. The cursor still blinked. I paused at the reason field, pressed my finger to the keyboard, and let it go. I remembered my grandfather, the smoke smell on his firefighter coat, his line, "Study. Your 529 will be enough." I whispered, "I'll hold on one more day." I closed the form, opened my drive, dragged every statement into a folder called Graduation or Bust. My phone buzzed. Harper sent one line, "Emergency request sent. Wait for morning." Jada dropped a fire icon. I replied with a small heart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I listened to the CTA through the window, steel scraping steel into an even wave. I suddenly understood. Chicago teaches many things, but the clearest is that sometimes family chills you more than the lake wind. And for that very reason, if I don't light a fire myself, no one will light it for me. I set the alarm for 6, folded clothes, set out shoes. Tomorrow morning, either I lose the slot or I keep it with a thin thread called proper paperwork. I pulled up the blanket, set a hand on my chest, imagined the loudspeaker in the arena, my name being called. If no one can get me there, I'll go myself, even if I have to walk through the wind. Amid the most intense 24 hours, the keeper of the keys appeared, with a timed lock my grandfather had set in advance. In the morning, Alvarez met me in a glass conference room overlooking the river, set a thick blue binder, trust and 529 binder. In front of me, the faint scent of old paper and leather like the breath of my grandfather Frank. He opened the binder, flipped past a set of dividers, his fingers stopping at a bold-faced petition, matching clause. His voice was steady, unembellished. Your grandfather signed this clause 3 years before he passed. If the beneficiary, meaning you, graduates with a bachelor's degree before 25, the trustee must disburse a match equal to the entire amount previously withdrawn from the 529, plus 8% annual interest from a separate matching fund. He paused a beat for me to swallow the word entire, then read on. At the same time, the trustee has the obligation to notify the beneficiary of any unusual withdrawals and to refer suspected fraud, if any, to the authorities. The sentences were short but heavy, like bricks, relaying the path I thought had shattered. Alvarez turned to another page, the section on changing the custodian. All changes required dual signatures, Elaine and me, he said, laying a ruler across the 2 signature boxes. His box had remained blank since day 1, while beside Elaine there was a heavy stroke, the letter R drawn out strangely. He looked up. You see it, don't you? This is why your paperwork suddenly changed address. One signature isn't enough to lock it. But if someone forged your mother's name, the system would have been tilted open. I heard my heart beat distinctly like a CTA train over the rails. He pulled out another stack of papers. The alert log for email contact changes, system login times, requests to redirect mail to a P.O. box. Note the timestamps, he said softly, because they will converse with the tuition advance notations on the statements. Leaving the bank, I Zoom called with Harper. She split the screen. On the left was my mother's real signature sample, soft, the letter R neat. On the right was the misstroked Elaine O'Rourke on the update, heavy, elongated as if the writer were trying to fake with the left hand. Harper drew another red line. Email metadata shows the admin account switched to Deb's Gmail in the very first week of the withdrawal sequence. The login IP matches a device at her office. I asked quietly, Is it enough to form a sentence yet? Harper nodded. Enough for people who aren't number savvy to understand, and enough for Alvarez to activate the unusual activity reporting provision in the matching clause. The word activate made me shiver. It turned out my grandfather hadn't left a door hanging open. He'd left a timed lock, and the key would fall into my hand only when I wore the cap and gown. Harper opened another timeline, pairing the withdrawal lines with Deb's public photos. Week 3, a silver SUV parked in front of a new garage. Month 8, the Pilsen kitchen transformed, countertop stone still reflecting her silhouette. Month 14, a financial freedom post with a credit card bill showing no balances. These are only suggestions, Harper said, avoiding heavy conclusions, but the timing aligned significantly. I sat still, listening to the distant lake wind echo into the room. On the screen, yellow boxes lit up. Withdrawals, green boxes, purchase milestones, a thin gray line, my academic terms. The 3 colors layered into a map whose destination wasn't a store or a new kitchen, but the stage on graduation day. In the afternoon, we returned to the bank. Alvarez printed a concise letter requesting to freeze all custodian changes and to record the beneficiary's on-time graduation under the matching clause. He looked at me, eyes kind like a lighthouse keeper. The rest belongs to ceremony. On commencement day, I'll be in the wings with the envelope. Deb doesn't need to know beforehand because this is Frank's timed lock. no one else's. I held the sample envelope, the thick, cool paper in my hand. As we went out the door, Harper texted, "Hold steady. On that day, the truth will walk in its own shoes, needing no one to carry it." I smiled at my reflection in the glass, the graduation cap like a small awning, and the wind, still cold, no longer cutting through my chest. I understood. When my grandfather wrote that clause, he didn't choose to trust anyone. He chose to trust time and achievement. The lock had its date. The rest was preparing for the moment it sprang open. The weeks that followed strung together like fast-forwarded film clips. In the morning, I tied my shoelaces on the stoop and ran along the lakefront trail while the lake was still veiled in mist, the smell of cold water and fresh bread drifting from a street cart. In the afternoon, I sat on the edge by the glass at the UIC library, sunlight slanting across tall stacks of books, nodding over my notebook and a cup of coffee gone cold. When night fell, I opened the old laptop, set it next to a rattling empty tip can, took a deep breath, and kept typing. I divided the day into small squares and colored them in. Econ study group, shift at the coffee truck, invoice checks at the print shop, slide practice with Harper. Whenever I flagged, I opened the running map, dragged my green streak a little farther, then returned to my desk with my lungs full of wind. Grades came back like an old friend. I kept a 3.8 GPA by staying until the library lights flickered closing time. The Chicago Irish Community Scholarship application asked for an essay about roots and gratitude. I wrote about my grandfather, Frank, the smoke streaks that clung to his firefighter coat, his voice telling me to study instead of any gift, and about my mother, Elaine, who swapped shifts constantly to keep my health insurance from lapsing, her hands cracked from sanitizer but always warm when she set them on my shoulder. The day the congratulations letter arrived, my mother hugged me right there in the kitchen, the distant roar of the orange line like a round of applause woven into the wind. Harper taught me another language. One page, one truth. One invoice, one conclusion line. We called it an audit deck for fun, but in essence, it was just a tidy, decent way to tell a story. I learned PowerPoint like learning to breathe. Simple fonts, white background, arrows pointing the way from statements to the recipient column. I also opened Excel, practiced lining dates into a sequence, drew the cells to calculate interest on the gradual withdrawals, then color-marked the points that matched the photos of the new car, the new countertop. At first, my eyes ached, my head tangled. Gradually, the numbers stopped scaring me. They weren't a storm. They were raindrops laid into a trail that, long enough, would speak for itself. Jada sat across from me, sometimes nodding off on a pile of papers. I tapped her wrist lightly and swapped in a new pack of highlighters. From the screen, Harper reminded me, change slides slowly, pause in the right places so people have time to see. I wrote it down. Pause in the right places. That was also a lesson for myself. At home, my mother switched shifts, some days coming back before the sun was up, still setting a small pot of soup on the stove with a sticky note, "Eat warm, don't skip." On the nights I came home late, she set a bottle of water and a vitamin by the bed, asked nothing more, just checked that the outlets were off. We said little but understood much. Sometimes a nod was enough. I stuck a new note on my desk. No need to be perfect, need to show up. That sentence pulled me out of bed on mornings too cold to leave the blankets. I wrote small thank you letters to the scholarship fund, to the print shop, to the teachers who graded fairly, and to the me of a year ago who didn't click, withdraw. Each letter was a way to breathe. At the end of the month, Harper handed me the organized packet, a clear cover. Each tab labeled succinctly, statements, email updates, signatures, withdrawal timeline, public photos, match clause. We rehearsed in front of the mirror. I stood straight, spoke slowly, kept eye contact. Jada played the tough person, asked questions. I answered with a slide, not with anger. When the lights were off, I sat down with my back against the wall and felt as if my heart had grown lighter. It didn't need applause. It needed the sense that I had prepared properly for the big day. Before bed, I texted Harper, "Tomorrow a 5K along the lake and then review the deck." She sent back a thumbs up. "Let's go." I reminded myself, I don't need their money to survive. I need my own truth to graduate. And every click, every step along the lake, every cup of coffee I pour for a stranger is a way I tell Chicago and my grandfather that I am reaching the finish line on my own strength. When the graduation cap flies, I want it to fall into hands that do not shake, already open to receive both the diploma and an envelope that time and the truth have set aside for me. The ceremony begins. When the wax seal is cut, our time also turns onto a new bend. Credit Union 1. Arena blazed like an artificial sky. Mortarboards struck the cheers. Blue and white banners billowed with the wind. The speakers called each name like a heartbeat. I held my mother's hand, breathed in the scent of new paper and the small chrysanthemums pinned to our gowns, then saw Deb in the next section, phone held high, live streaming with the caption, "Niece overcomes hardship thanks to family." I didn't look into her lens. I looked to the stage where Dean Lynn stepped out, his voice warm and ceremonious, inviting Bank Representative Alvarez to read a letter long sealed, only to be opened when someone named Noelle O'Rourke graduated on time. The whole hall dipped for a beat. An usher brought out a thick envelope, the wax seal glinting under the lights. SFX almost audible, the paper sliced with a crisp, dry tear. The crowd held its breath. Alvarez opened the letter, his voice so clear you could count the periods. I, Franklin O'Rourke, direct that when my granddaughter completes her bachelor's degree on time, she be given a match equal to all sums withdrawn from her 529 in the prior period, plus accrued interest. And if any irregular withdrawals are found, the bank shall notify the authorities on the family's behalf. A murmur rose like rolling surf. The side screen lit up, Jada's camera linked to the deck we'd prepared. Statement lines appeared with sensitive data carefully masked, leaving only the arrows showing money's path. Beside them, a faint image of the forged signature, the stretched R, with the name obscured but enough for people to understand the story. I heard a few sharp inhales and a tiny "oh my God" from the back row. Deb shot to her feet, her voice hard as a knife on a plate. "This is private business." Dean Lynn didn't raise an eyebrow, only tilted his head slightly. "This is the bequest letter presentation. Please be seated so the ceremony can continue." A few camera tally lights went dark and came back on. I felt my hands tremble lightly, but my knees stood firm as pillars. Alvarez folded the letter, drew from a second envelope a cashier's check printed with my name. Simple, neat, unshowy, and a short note apologizing on behalf of the trustees to Mr. Frank's descendants for the troubles past. He stepped forward, bowed very slightly as a nod to an absent man named Franklin, then placed the check and letter in my hands. There was no swelling music, only a Chicago courtesy. When truth arrives, people make way. The applause spread from a small corner like ripples, scattered, then full, then on their feet. My mother touched a hand to my back. Somewhere Jada let out a soft whistle, and I could hear my grandfather laughing inside that applause. As Dean Lynn invited me to receive my diploma, Time suddenly slowed. I could see every thread in the tassel, each dust mote dancing in the beam, see classmates smiling at each other like sharing a warm coat. I walked up with my shoulders straight, my hand steady as it took the diploma. In my head, I said very softly, "Grandpa, I did it." And I understood what I hadn't been able to name for 4 years. His matching clause wasn't money. It was a storm shelter raised in advance. A time lock that opened the moment I wore the cap. After the ceremony, the lake wind whipped salt against my cheeks. Deb passed by. Phone lowered, mouth pinched as if swallowing the wind. I said nothing. I simply gripped the letter, the check, and the diploma, knowing the part I needed to say was already contained in that rip of paper. A small sound that echoes for a long time. On the big screen, "Congratulations to the new graduates," slid past like a train. My mother and I held each other, standing still in the confetti, letting the storm close behind us with a public, neat, clean flip, exactly as he had planned for me. The morning at Cook County Circuit Court, Civil Division was cold and bright like a fresh sheet of paper. I sat in the middle of the wooden benches, my palms making the wood slick with sweat, looked at the state seal hanging high on the wall, and listened to the stenograph clicking like a clock hand. Elaine sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee for a beat, long enough for my heart to slow. Deb sat on the opposite bench, adjusted her glasses, whispered something into the phone before the bailiff called the session. When Judge Patel entered, the room settled, just like the moment before the blade slices the wax seal at graduation. The bank's attorney and Alvarez submitted the first set of filings, black and white bank statements. Each withdrawal line no longer stray numbers but footsteps over time. Tuition advance. Repeating, the recipient's arrows running straight into Deb O'Rourke Hayes' account. Next came the Trust 529 file, the clause requiring dual signatures for any guardian change, the trustee's role, the letter of duty to report irregular withdrawals. Harper presented the forensic report, signature comparison, the elongated R, uneven pen pressure, email metadata switching to Deb's Gmail, login IP logs from a device at her office, a timeline matching personal spending and home renovations. The graduation clip was submitted only as context, a day when the sealed envelope was opened per the bequest. Not theater, just a milestone. At Cross, Deb tried to fashion a soft tone. It was a temporary loan to invest for the family. I intended to repay when the market improved. Harper looked straight ahead, her voice no higher than usual. There is no loan agreement in writing or email. The funds went into Ms. Deb's personal account, then straight to consumer spending, card payoff, and a kitchen remodel at the Pilsen property. There are no transactions to the UIC bursar or any tuition processor. And under the Trust Top 529 documents, she had no authority to unilaterally change the guardian or mailing address. Judge Patel nodded, turned a page, asked 2 brief questions about signature chain of custody. Harper pointed to the comparison chart. Alvarez confirmed his signature box in the guardian change paperwork was blank, from start to finish. I watched Deb inhale, her fingernails pressing into her palms as if to erase the ink. When it came to closing words, I didn't speak. I only lifted my eyes to the seal on the wall, remembering my grandfather's voice when he said, "Study. Your fund is enough." Justice to me now isn't a crashing wave, but a string of beads falling into the right tray, each piece of evidence dropping into its place. Judge Patel's ruling was concise, clear as a balanced line. Order full repayment of all principal withdrawn from my 529, plus civil interest under Illinois law from the date of the first withdrawal to the date of payment. Costs to the defendant. Issue an injunction against Deb. No contact with, interference in, or requests to change any educational assets in my name going forward, including tuition accounts, scholarships, or education savings plans. All information about me must be sent directly to the beneficiary and the trustee per the records. Finally, the court recommended that the bank refer the suspected signature fraud and false documentation to the appropriate prosecuting authority for criminal review, at the discretion of the state's attorney's office. The gavel fell. That resonance went through my bones like a cool, clean wind. Deb bowed her head, hurried for her phone, her voice small and urgent as she called someone. No more live stream, no more for the family. Elaine still sat straight, her hand leaving my knee to straighten my collar, a calm gesture that made me want to cry. Alvarez shook my hand in the hallway, said only one sentence. The old man would be proud. Harper dropped a big green check mark into the group chat. Jada sent a graduation cap emoji. I leaned my forehead against the glass door, watched the city flow under a gray sky, and saw that justice, in the end, is not a strangled scream. It is numbers. It is the semicolons in a judgment. It is an injunction line that keeps the lake wind, however cold, from touching my tuition money. I gripped my diploma, knowing what needed to be said had been written into the record, and signed in the right place, in the right hand. Summer in Chicago is always bright like a fresh page. I stood beneath the silver canopy of the Pritzker Pavilion, listening to rehearsal music echo across the green lawn, with an offer letter in my pocket for a data analyst job at an accounting firm right in the heart of the Loop. No fireworks went off, only the sound of my own heart beating steady like stepping onto a CTA train. Calm, on time, and moving forward. The night before, my mother Elaine slept through for the first time. In the morning, she smiled and said, "My eyes don't have dark circles anymore," then pulled me to Portillo's, the two of us splitting a hot Italian beef, sauce falling onto the napkin, and we laughed heartily as if there had never been days of scrambling for tuition. At noon, the inbox showed an email from Alvarez. The bank is opening a personal finance class for first-gen students. Noelle, do you want to be a mentor? I replied yes, almost immediately. It had been a long time since I truly understood what it means to let someone else walk through a door I had opened. Deb hung a for sale sign in front of the house, the sun pouring down on the glaring white board. Passers-by looked out of curiosity, then kept going. No one lingered long. I did not feel jubilant about it, only that everything was being returned to its proper place. Jada sent me the cut, from stolen fund to matching clause, the segment where the sealed letter was slit open at graduation, making TikTok ripple like a lake touched by wind. I watched it once, and then closed the laptop, brewed myself a cup of tea, opened the window to catch the breeze. Best revenge, Watan, living well, I wrote on the sticky note beside the desk, and underlined it twice. Grandpa, you thought farther than greed. She took away my tuition money, but she could not take my right to graduate, and even less the way I move forward. I am starting work, and in the evenings I teach extra on money management to friends who are juggling like I was last year. I keep the check turned into a small emergency fund, and I also keep your letter in a simple frame on the bookshelf, to remind that there are loves that choose to speak by clauses, to protect us on the very day it's needed. And you, if you have ever had family wrench your future off course, comment match to remind each other that there is always a way to spring back with truth and discipline. Thank you for going with me to the end of this journey with us. Please like the video, subscribe, and comment match, so the algorithm understands that you want to see more family justice stories.